Hey there, friends. We have less than 90 days to the annual Midwest Arts Expo. I can't believe it. You know what else I can't believe? You can still get early bird registration through July 14th. So, if you're like me and waiting for the new fiscal year to start, you can still enjoy the reduced rate. Do I have a reminder set for me to register on July 1? Yes. Why? Because I'm looking forward to seeing all my friends from the Midwest and a few honorary and former Midwesterners like myself at the Midwest Arts Expo, September 15th through the 18th in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And don't forget, come say hi in the expo hall at booth 511. You can register at midwestartsexpo.org.
Hello and welcome to There's No Business Like, a podcast where friends and industry colleagues explore topics and interview leaders in our industry of professional theatrical touring.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to There's No Business Like. I'm Katie Miller with Michigan Maven Creative Associates, and I am so pleased to have three fantastic guests in the studio with me today. Caroline, welcome.
Hi, Katie. I'm Caroline Myers, Director of Education at Des Moines Performing Arts in Des Moines, Iowa.
Paige, welcome to the show.
Woot woot. Hi, Katie. I'm Paige Hernandez, multidisciplinary creative based in Washington, D.C., and owner and founder of my company, B-Fly Entertainment.
Excellent. Welcome. And Daniel.
Hey, Katie. Nice to see you. This is Daniel Hahn. I'm the Vice President of Education at Playhouse Square in Cleveland, Ohio.
Wonderful. Cleveland, actually one of my favorite cities. So I was just there last summer and saw some of your beautiful venues. So happy to have you with us today.
Thanks for having us.
I have gathered this fantastic panel of guests today because we're going to have a conversation about commissioning new work, specifically in the theater for young audience spaces. So all of our listeners know this is one of my favorite spaces to talk about. One of the things I'm passionate about. We're in quite a moment in 2025, but there's a lot of great work happening in the new workspace for theater for young audiences. So we want to talk a little bit about that today. So I want to ask my guests just to kick off the conversation with, when I say the word commissioning, what does that actually mean to you from both the venue side and the artist side? So Daniel, why don't we start with you?
Well, that's a great question. You know, when I think of commissioning, I sometimes think of the traditional producer writing a check and paying for a portion of an artist developing their work. That's sort of the first thing that pops into my mind. But I also know commissioning can take on different faces. It could be donating space to artists in some cases. It can be a collective group of folks coming together to support and help cover the costs. And those are the initial thoughts that I have when I think about commissioning.
So Paige, what does the word commissioning mean for you from an artist perspective?
It makes me smile. Commissioning means that there will be a lofty investment into what I do. You know, I would say a paycheck, and that's pretty, that's straightforward. But the truth is it's really an investment into a gift that keeps on giving. For an artist, a commission could be from 1 year to 3 years, just depending on the scale and scope or the size of the actual commission. So that's really great. I mean, that gives us such grounding and a stability to really allow us to do what we do in a way that feels like it's being provided with resources as well as interest. And, you know, the really cool part about commissioning is usually when I get that call or that email that says a commission is wanted, it's a direct cater to the community. I would then cater that commission to whatever the need is of any given demographic or curriculum or district. So it becomes something that's super unique, but also that is really trying to validate wherever I'm going and what it is that they need and be able to kind of provide a platform for them. So commissioning is a great thing. I've never known it to not be a good thing, but for sure it means a new work and then a work that's probably going to be something that sustains me as an artist over the course of a year.
So then from your perspective, you just mentioned getting a call from a venue, perhaps, or a community that's looking for something to meet their needs. Is that more often what happens? Is somebody reaches out to you and says, we're looking for a work that addresses X, Y, and Z? Or do sometimes you have a project in mind and you seek out commissioning partners? How does that process work?
Yeah, I would say it's the first way around in that the venue usually reaches out to me and or my agent and says, I have this idea or I have this need. That happens more often than myself reaching out personally to attempt to do something. Usually when it's the artist driven, it's a passion project, or it's something that has been on the hopper, I guess, for a few years, and we want to, be able to put some life into it. But more than likely, a commission usually comes from the venue and from the community itself.
That's so interesting. So then Daniel and Caroline, you both have worked in the commissioning space from the venue side. So how does that process work for you? Have you found that you've had a need and reached out to a particular artist to help you build a project? Or is it, oh, I have this longstanding relationship with an artist, they bring work to you? How does that work on the venue side?
I think it's been a little bit of both. I think speaking from our venue, it's been actually pretty rare that we have been kind of the launching commissioner and asking for an artist to do something from the ground up that we have an idea on. That's happened on occasion, but more often I think maybe there's an artist like Paige that we've worked with, or somebody that they have a lead commissioner that has started a project, or they've had that idea, and then we're approached to say, can you also be a commissioner and pitch in additional funding or space or other resources? Because potentially that lead commissioner can't actually, like, it may be a sizable gift to be that resource to kick things off, but it's still not enough to cover the entire costs of that development process. So you need additional supporters to come in. And so getting those pitches has often been, then it's a matter of, is this an artist that we have an existing relationship in, that we want to invest further in the development of their next work? And is this new work something that we also feel like will be resonant to our community for us to say, yes, we want to really get in on that ground level and use financial or other resources to really help that fly, to increase its likelihood of coming to full fruition, and eventually, particularly in our case, because we're a presenting organization, to have the legs to actually be able to nationally tour and make its way to us. It can go from both sides, but I think it's important to keep in mind that maybe a venue will kick off that commissioning process, but they often need other supporters to come in to really help get it all the way across the finish line with the resources that it takes. Mm-hmm. And that can be a really valuable process as well.
I think that was really well said. The interesting story that I think of when I think of commissioning is about 12 years ago, when I was new in my position. I was meeting all of the artistic directors of local dance companies, because my background is in theater and I didn't really know anything about dance. So I wanted to meet with people who were experts in that. And I remember meeting with Bill Wade of Inlet Dance Theater. And I said to him, you're one of the most respected, most talented modern contemporary dance companies in the region. Do you ever have an interest in taking a children's book and adapting it into a story? And he said, oh yeah, that interests me. And so I said, how about Velveteen Rabbit? That's one of my favorite stories. And he said, oh no, not that one. So, but fascinatingly enough, he then found the book, What Do You Do with an Idea by Kobe Yamada. So we became the commissioning partner on that project, and we're very pleased with it. And Playhouse Square then later self-produced Velveteen Rabbit. So I think these things can happen in their own time, and there are no failures if you're basing it on relationship and respect of an artist.
Yeah, I'd love to chime in here too, because just the way with Caroline, how Caroline just presented it, that kind of happened with me and Playhouse Square with Daniel, which is that it was a second commission. This is for my piece, Havana Hop, but it almost worked into a development, So even though it was a commission, it wasn't from the ground up. It was, in fact, a kind of second stage and in support of something that already existed. But how do we make it better and more intentional? And in this case, Daniel, it was specifically sensory friendly. So yeah, it still had the commission title, even though the piece had already existed. But it was, what can we do to further support it, or to just be a part of that? And it's ongoing kind of legacy.
And I think there's a couple of elements that you've all mentioned I want to touch on. So one, like Paige, you just said, like adding more elements to a work or expanding it, developing phase two. Could that also include like educational materials, workshops, community engagement activities as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Speaking again to my end, and with being with Playhouse Square, because we had that intentionality of a sensory friendly show, meaning it was going to be always sensory friendly. It wasn't just for specific performances. It was going to have this lens so that it could always stand that way. Meant that, yes, all of our supplemental supporting material would also have that intention. So yes, we got to develop the curriculum guide and workshops, and even what we do just with audience engagement and interaction all had that lens connected to it. And some of those same materials I'm still using some 10 odd years later, just because, again, they were given a very specific lens through a specific commission at that time.
And we still have on our website, on our sensory friendly landing page, video of Paige while this was in development. When we were still working on, like, what's the right costume? How's this set? We had folks from the Cuyahoga County Board of Developmental Disabilities coming in and coaching us on, oh, this is more sensory friendly than that and things. And overall, I would say having an artist that you truly value and respect in your venue for an extended amount of time, that's not just you're here for 2 days doing a show and then you're gone and there it was, but they're there and they're enriching the community and building something larger than you had before they walked on the stage. It's just so valuable, especially as an organization that primarily presents other folks' work. The more commissioning we can do and the more working with artists like Paige, I think the more we're truly fulfilling our mission and serving our community.
I'm going to circle back to the money part of the business here in just a moment, but I wanted to also touch on space and time that you mentioned as another part of this commissioning equation. And Caroline, I remember you in particular telling me a story of 2 artists that came and used your space at Des Moines to develop a brand new piece of work. And I don't know that you necessarily commissioned it, but you gave them a platform and space and time to work together to create something new. So can you tell us that story?
Yeah, we've had a couple of opportunities where we've been able to open up our space that, financial resources is definitely something that is always needed, but also time is money, space is money, and oftentimes artists don't have a place to do that. And so a couple of years ago, we were fortunate enough to bring in 2 musicians, one that we'd had a longstanding relationship working with, Justin Roberts. He's actually a Des Moines native. And we were interested in, yes, bringing him back to our community, but also saying, well, what can we do beyond his typical concerts? Because he does have this deep rooted here. And talking with his agent, saying, well, actually, there's an artist that he's always wanted to co-write with. It was also on the roster. And so we were able to bring them in, and they gave 2 concerts at the end of the week. But the first 4 days leading up to that was just giving them one of our small theaters and letting them play and co-write music. So they were able to premiere some new songs together, perform together. And now they actually have this program that is one of the things that they can book and take out. And so it was just slightly more than the typical artist fee that we would have had to have them come in, giving them one of our spaces that was sitting empty for those 4 days. And just what a gift that was, and has launched this program that they can now tour in the start of an EP as well. So there can be lots of different ways that you can support new works development. And sometimes it's a big theatrical piece that has all of the bells and whistles of sets and costumes and all of that. And it might be something in a different art form that is a little bit more nimble. And what they were able to walk out of with just a few days was also really, really valuable, and something that our community was able to feel tangibly after a few days and that they were still talking about.
That's cool.
So it's kind of matchmaking the what are the resources and what are the needs, and not being afraid to ask the question. If you're working with an agent or an artist, what's the dream? What would you like to do next? And is there a way that we can help?
I love that, because not every venue has the financial resources to put in towards a project, but you said they have empty space, or they have a community room, or they have educators that would love to be part of a development process that could be recruited in to be a part of, seeing work for the first time, responding and helping build out education materials, whatever that might look like. I think there's a lot of different ways to engage with new work in that way that's not necessarily just financial.
Correct.
So on that note, though, Paige, from the artist side of it, when you get support like that, how do you then quantify that? Because you have to have a budget as an artist for development of new work. You're applying for grants. You're looking at other commissioning partners. When you get sort of in-kind support plus monetary support, how are you quantifying that and valuing that on the artist side?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I feel like it just depends on the project. That was a great example, because I've had commissions where just having space to work with my laptop is huge. And that could be more than the paycheck itself, just because I know I can't do it at home and I know I don't have a dedicated workspace. So just to be able to even commute or drive into a space, like Caroline said, that's available can be worth so much. I mean, I banged out like 2 scripts just by having the space and the quiet time and around. Just like you were saying, Katie, I've also done commissions where it's like, hey, we got these new toys, these new tools. We got this new lighting instrument. We've got this new QLab software. We've got this new, why don't we give you 2 days to come play and see what it inspires? Because maybe you find out in using this new software that you can now, light your whole show yourself. Like, I've been able to program a show with my watch. And I only found that out because a venue offered the space and said, we have these new things and pretty much, do you want to come test it out? It's not even being a guinea pig. It really is just about like, here's something that you wouldn't typically have, we wouldn't typically have, but we know that it can kind of speak your language in terms of the mediums that you use. So yes, depending on that is how you quantify, is my goal here to have a script and text where I just need to put fingers to the keyboard and have a few pages done? Is my goal here to think outside of the box about how I can use light and sound and technology or projections? I'll say that again, going back to, I'll use this example a lot with Havana Hop, going back to Playhouse Square, that was the first time we incorporated projections into my show. I didn't know what the budget was and I didn't know what it entailed, but that's where you figure it out and that's where you learn it. And it makes a world of difference. You can't do it in your office space or in your studio.
Right.
I mean, to be able to be in a theatrical space where you can see it all come to light, it makes all the difference. I guess it just depends on what those kind of goals are. And, sometimes, like Caroline said, like having no goals is also awesome, and the ability to fail, just to have space and say whatever you want to do with it. But if there are outcomes expected, like scripts, like a sharing, like can you make a video now or social media buzz around it, then that's when you begin to have the conversations about how you quantify things. And I think that's an honest and upfront conversation with the venue. Would you like a sharing? Do you need to be able to have deliverables to show to, your board or to your audiences? And then I can kind of determine the best way to kind of quantify it.
So then, Daniel, going back to you, let's talk a little bit about money, because this is called There's No Business Like. So let's talk about money for just a second. How do you even start? So I've been a part of a couple of commissions. Jennifer Hickman did a orchestral piece with our youth symphony when I was at Interlochen. We did some choral commissioning when I was at the Midland Center for the Arts, but those were pretty small, I would say. I don't even know how you even start quantifying how much money you can budget, how much an artist's time is worth, working back and forth with how much the artist is going to need to develop that new work and that process, rehearsals. So how do you, from the venue side, even start to imagine the budget, and what's the conversation like with the artist in terms of what they need for that development process?
Yeah, for me, I'm really fortunate that when I started in my position, there was a line item in the departmental budget, which was for development of new work. And it was essentially unrestricted funds that at the VP's discretion could allocate to artists to support their work. So I didn't, because of the timing of budgets, around March or April, you kind of have to know what you're going to spend in the next year, or at least know what you're going to ask for. So in this particular instance, we had money set aside, and then I would just talk to different artists, and if there's a project that I thought had legs or that could be helpful for our community, I would just have a conversation and see what they needed. In the case of like Paige's wonderful project, I knew that space was going to be helpful and that time was going to be helpful. So those were huge things that we were able to provide. Back when we were working with Seth and Christina on Acro Buffos on their airplay show, they taught me more than I ever learned from them about producing and commissioning, because Seth would say, man, I want to bring my director in town. Can you pay for that? I'm like, okay. Can you pay for the flight? Okay. Can you pay for him to be here for a week? And for us, can you pay for us like salaries to be here? And can we be in your space? And can you pay all the stagehands? And these helium tanks are expensive. Okay. So, I was really learning. And then we got to turn the table. I said, all right, now let's talk about a budget for this thing touring. And they were like, what? So then I said, here's what it costs for you to be in a theater. How much do stagehands cost? Yeah, this is what this is. Oh, wow. We really learned a lot from each other in that particular project. But what it taught me was that having a pool of unrestricted funds at the beginning of the year that can be allocated as artists come to you or that you go see artists is hugely helpful. And every artist I've ever supported has been so grateful, whether it was, us paying, $8,000 to buy puppets for a show for an artist, and that was the extent of the support, or whether it was a significant $25,000 check we wrote to be a linchpin, producer, commissioner on another project. the size of the gifts are important, but really it's the investment in the artist and the work, and having, I think, a reputation as a performing arts center like Caroline does in Des Moines and others have, that we care about artists, we care about this field, and we work for institutions that put their money where their mouth is. It's really wonderful to have those resources to be able to share.
Yeah, I'll just say too that, Daniel, thank you for that, because commissioning taught me as an artist more about the business. Absolutely. So you figure out how to make those budgets, what is needed, how many stage hands, what that costs. Yes, do you want a team to be a part of this commissioning, which includes director and choreographer and a projection designer? Because yeah, I think initially it's like, oh wow, this feels very one-on-one, and then you realize you have to kind of broaden it and it becomes a whole bigger thing than that. But yes, if it weren't for these commissioning projects, I would not, have known from the beginning what all it entails, what to ask for, and how to begin to kind of budget and make those line items for future commissions.
I'm just thinking about some of the conversations I've been fortunate to have with artists where I think, really kind of the first decade plus a little bit as a presenter of booking shows, you kind of see the fee and the ask, and you don't necessarily know what's happening behind the curtain. And engaging in commissioning conversations has given me such a deeper respect for the challenges that artists have and what they're thinking about, and vice versa, just like what Daniel was saying, what's happening on the presenter side. And I think you just enter into every conversation about even just booking with a new respect for what that ecosystem requires on both sides. And a better understanding when you're looking at a work about, maybe there's sometimes you've got some hangups about, well, it's not quite where I want it to be. And now understanding what artists are going through to try to get work developed and produced, to say like, oh, well, if we actually can come in on the front end, not for every project, but a few key ones that we can really invest in, we are elevating what's happening on our stages, but we're really elevating what's available to the field. And it took me a long time to realize how much work Daniel and his cohorts at Playhouse Square were doing to support some of my absolute favorite shows we've ever had the ability to present on our stages. You go to the booking conferences and it can appear like, well, here's the glossy brochure and you're booking it and you're buying this thing that's like ready made off the shelf. It's not the case whatsoever. And having a much better understanding of my ability to book strong work is reliant and is a ripple effect of the investment that not only artists have made, but other presenters that have invested in the commissioning process. I think just gives us such a better sense of how we're all in it together and where can we all pull our own weight. In addition to those booking fees and getting artists to our stages, some of us have the capability to get in on the ground floor, and it just rises what's available to all of us that much more.
Caroline, what are some of those challenges that you mentioned that you learned about through that process that you maybe never would have been aware of or thought about before?
Well, I think there's just like, what is the scale of what are the financial resources that it takes to invest in some of those physical assets, the time and the space, and our artists needing to be able to pay themselves and have a paycheck for that time. You don't always necessarily think about that when you're coming from the lens of a venue where we do have a salary and we know where our next work and paycheck is coming from. So like you may know it in one part of your brain, but I think it hit harder hearing about those experiences directly from artists who've been willing to really kind of open up and talk about that in a really personal way. I think it's also been really insightful. Some of the conversations I had with artists are ones that, like, on the surface, everything feels like they're at the top of their game and they're getting bookings all the time. And to hear about the challenges they had raising the capital for their second project made me really go like, oh, this is a really steep hill for artists to climb, even those who are established and with relationships across the country, to hear them talk about, I want to invest the time in creating new work, but the additional time it takes to try to have those one-on-one conversations and cultivate and make pitches and asks to potential funders takes a huge amount of time and a huge amount of vulnerability, when that takes away from their actual ability and their resources and their time to actually do the creation, and how just wearing down that can be, to kind of feel like you're constantly knocking on those doors, or even feeling like, can you knock on that door, because of the nature of the relationship.
Yeah, and I totally agree, Caroline. And I would also add that I don't want it to go unsaid that the role of the agents who represent these artists in these conversations, because for Playhouse Square, we will only work with artists who have representation. I won't book shows, no matter how great they are, unless they have an agent who I know and I trust. Because again, it's about the relationships. So often these commissioning conversations with artists are first started when their agent gives me a call or shoots me a note. Like I know Paige works with Simon Shaw and Sherry Leathers at Shaw Entertainment, and they're phenomenal. So when I get a call from Simon, I'll listen. And there are other agents, probably too many to name, or I'd be spending the rest of this call. But the work that those agents do, I'm learning now as a producer of a show that is looking to take it on the road and working with an agent who usually I'm writing the checks and bringing the shows. Now I'm saying, here's a show, you want to represent it? And they're saying, yeah. So now I'm seeing what the agents have to go through. So this education for me never really stops, and my respect for the work that these representatives do with all the artists on their roster, because they can only put so many folks on their roster and successfully represent and care for each of these artists in a way that is helpful for them. So my respect for the agents too, as well as the artists, has just grown exponentially in this process.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, I'll say as an artist, the agent and convincing them about your next new idea, it feels like the first step, because once you've got them hooked, then yes, they can go and pitch and slash sell what that idea is to a venue for potential commission. Absolutely. And I've been blessed because I've had only one agent my entire career, which is Simon Shaw. And to know that we do have that relationship and that he has this relationship with the venues and with all of the different staff there. And then, yeah, if I've got that great idea and he's like, oh, you know who could be a good fit for that? Des Moines or Playhouse Square. And why don't I have that conversation for you? Which, of course, takes something off of my plate. And then I also wanted to just echo what Caroline said about a lot of what's packed into or baked into that commissioning fee is our security and is our ability to not have a scarcity mindset so that we can truly be free to create in a way that would do it justice versus having to constantly think about the other things we're juggling or why we can't give 100% focus to this new thing or thought. And to have that, again, means everything. I mean, it's the difference between something that's just kind of simmering and something that's boiling. When you have it, it's just, there's nothing like it. It's so freeing, and it just feels like you're at your capacity and you're operating on all kind of gears and motors versus being a little stifled and like the rug can be pulled from under you at any moment. So that's the difference between commissioning and here's a contract to just do this thing for a couple days.
And the other thing, Paige, you just reminded me of that I think we as presenters can offer artists is something that you might not otherwise have access to, which is an audience. And if it's the very first time you're putting this work up, boy, did it really land, when we had Havana Hop in the theater, and then we were able to bring children in to just see, what do we have? What do we know what we think we have. What do we really have? So that's when, and seeing you like in the lobby greeting all these kids, many of whom have autism and their caregivers, and just those photos of those hugs and the depth of the meaning that it makes. Boy, it just really is special when it all comes together like that.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing all of that, friends. On the business side, let's take it one step further. I know a lot has changed since the pandemic, and venues just have less money to give. Relationships have shifted. We've lost some artists out of the industry. We've lost some veterans. Things have shifted. So Paige, I would want to ask you first, does it feel any different to you and the other artists that you share space with, that you're interacting with, that you're talking with? What have the shifts felt like to you when it comes to creation of new work since we sort of came back from the pandemic?
The shifts have felt like an ongoing roller coaster. I mean, if we go back 5 years to the time we don't want to talk about,
yes,
I think there were some real lows where we were just like, okay, we got to get out. There has to be an exodus. But then there were also hopeful times. There also was, for me, clarity and an understanding about how much I need to create and how often. And then, to see things pick back up again and then to get busier than I've ever been, even before pre-pandemic, and just what the needs are and where people feel comfortable again, experiencing this work again in person and interactive in this way. So it's been just like a lot. I think overall, though, and I can only speak for myself, is I learned a lot about just alternate paths and pivots and things that I can do to supplement this work when and if I need to. But it's hard. I mean, it's not for the faint of heart, which I know everybody knows, but it's really just about, how much can you feel like you are being poured into versus just pouring out? Because I think, for a while, it was about finding the balance again. Fortunately, with adversity, it's just going to be those hard roller coaster deep dives and big highs. So it's tricky because I don't have a finite answer. I mean, it's something I'm still in, but those shifts are there and you just kind of hang on. And just, actually, I had a conversation with Simon today where he was like, great, let's see what this 26, 27 season, because who knows?
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? And
We
it's
will be
like
heading
this
into booking
thing,
season soon.
right?
So
And it's like, oh, well, this might dry up. And oh, they did pause that. Oh, but they just reversed it. Oh, so it's just making planning even harder.
mhm.
So I think that's what we're in now. But I don't know if that answers the question,
No,
but it
that's
just
great.
feels like, yeah.
It feels like an echo of sort of what we've been hearing on the presenter side. And Caroline, I'd love for you to talk about alternate paths. So you and Daniel and I actually work together on a brand new project called the TYA Tour Development Collective. And you are one of the founding steering members of that. And it is an alternate path to funding for new work. So would love to hear a little bit about how that idea came to be and how you all developed it. And then we'll dig in.
One of the gifts, as much as we don't want to talk about what happened 5 years ago, one of the gifts is it put many of us in conversation with one another on a much more frequent basis. Many venues and agents, we'd see each other at booking conferences a few times a year, but suddenly we were having many more phone calls just trying to figure out like what is happening, how can we work together. There was this thing called Zoom that suddenly we're all on all the time, and so we don't have to necessarily wait until we're in person to have conversations. And one of the themes that was coming up, I think, between many members who actually eventually became steering committee members, which included Daniel and myself from the presenter side, as well as Sarah McCarthy from Dandelion Artists and Sarah Saltwick with Folden and Arts, was just the challenges that artists were facing getting commissioning dollars for new work or getting those resources together. And so there were lots of like kind of one-on-one conversations saying like there has to be a better way. And eventually we kind of started talking about taking inspiration from a group called the Independent Presenters Network, which is a consortium of many theaters, mostly based in North America, that specifically work together to help co-collect funds to help support the producing of new Broadway work. My organization and Daniel's organization are both part of that, and it's been around for 20 some years and has had lots of great success. But instead of one venue having to come up with all of the capital for what that producer is looking for, they can kind of buy in with specific units of certain amounts, and then they can kind of really pool those funds to build up to kind of the size of what those producers are asking for to be a producing partner. And we said there's something here, and we can take what we can learn from the Independent Presenters Network and shift it specifically to how it might work for the young audiences sector. So we had some great conversations amongst ourselves with some members of the IPN, with their administrator, and eventually launched what is now the TYA Tour Development Collective, which had just finished its first cycle and is starting to release funds to our very first commission projects. But when we rolled it out in the fall, we were seeking venues to become members with kind of the idea of everybody would commit to going into a funding cycle saying that they were going to put at least $5,000 towards a project. And then there was an application. So instead of producers coming and getting the onslaught of pitches, there was an application where we hoped to have, maybe a dozen applications the first year, and we received RFPs from 3 times as many projects. And then we were able to narrow it down and go through that, look at kind of the quality of the artist, relevancy to the field of young audience work, and kind of tour readiness, looking at a budget, a touring plan, what was the vision for the project. And we narrowed it down and invited 10 artists to do Zoom pitch sessions with the venue collective members. We had 9 venues that said yes to us in year one. So we were going in thinking we might have about $45,000 collectively to put towards some projects. And we got to have like 2 beautiful days on Zoom, getting to listen to these pitch sessions and hearing directly from artists about their vision, what they were working on, what they were draining for the funds. Most of them asked for between $10,000 and $25,000, which is kind of what we put out there as kind of, the goal range of what we were hoping to be able to support, with maybe 2 projects in that range. And we just walked away all feeling like, first, what a privilege and an honor it is to get to directly talk to artists and hear about their work. We love our agent friends. They do such a great job representing them, but to hear from the ground level what artists are dreaming of is such a special, special experience. So that in and of itself was really great. And then we had more conversations, and we're all able to go back to our own venues and figure out where we wanted to put our funds. And out of this first year's cycle, we were actually able to support 4 of the 10 projects at the amount that they requested. And several of the organizations ended up coming back with more than the $5,000 they initially thought they'd be putting forward, because they were so jazzed about what they heard from artists and were able to go back and really open the door for conversations with their executive leadership. So some organizations have a line item like Daniel, some were just like getting this as to, like, their foot in the door to build a line item. And so we're just really, really pleased with kind of this new model and this collective impact of being able to work together to seek project proposals and to work together to raise those funds, where it's not asking any one organization to put an entire commission on their back, but to work together. And I think all 4 projects had at least 3 organizations that pooled funds together to get them to that $10,000 to $25,000 of support.
Daniel, as a steering committee member, what struck you about this project, or why did you want to come on board to help bring it to fruition? And what does it mean for the industry, particularly the Theater for Young Audiences industry, to have a space where artists and venues can connect that maybe have never met before or worked together before, and to have this sort of collective action, right? This collective impact model? We see that a lot in social justice spaces, talking about collective impact and bringing resources together, but not so much in the art space.
Yeah, I think for me to see this come together is really the realization of a long-standing dream, because if you're working with just the same 2 or 3, presenting organizations, all being asked, can you kick in $25,000? And it's not going to be sustainable, because you cannot possibly serve the field to the degree that the needs are there. The needs have just accelerated for artists, and everything's more expensive. So to see this come together has been really rewarding. One story that was shared, because we announced the recipients of the inaugural year at the National TYA USA conference, and the morning that Honolulu Theater for Youth found out that they lost their NEA grant was the same afternoon that they found out they were accepted in this collective for the funding. So what was lost was instantly recouped, and that incredible project can move forward. So while I don't think in its initial stages we've hey, we solved the problem of funding, what we have done is we've got the most fundamentally important thing for me, I believe, is not that we raise so much money, or not that X amount of projects are now going to move forward, but that presenters are beginning to think of their own obligation to the future of the field in a fiduciary manner. That if you have $1 million budget and you can't even put 1% of your operating budget toward the future of the field, it's time to recalibrate. We can't all just, eat the dinner and not buy the groceries anymore. We have to be forward thinking as presenters. To me, that's the single most important thing that came out of this. And my job is, I get to, when I was on this panel with Caroline and the other brilliant women on this panel, I'm hearing them, roll off all these eloquent things. And I'm like, wow, what am I doing here? But at the end of the day, my role, I felt, was sort of saying, all right, presenters, if you're not on the map, if you're not joining us, my job, essentially, Katie, was to try to guilt people into saying, come on now. Come on, you got to have $5,000 for these artists. Come on. So I see that as my main role right now, as the advocate of, come on, people, sign up.
Well, and the thing, and I be transparent with our listeners. I am the administrator for this program. So I have the honor and the privilege and the blessing, honestly, of working with the steering team and working with the collective members. Seeing the artist applications roll in was so exciting, because like Caroline said, we had 34 artist applications in the first round, this first time ever, which exceeded our expectations. So to see this project come from a seed of an idea and us talking about it at Max last year, Caroline, to sort of we're funding 4 projects and all this money, and the artists are getting great feedback. They're getting in touch with venues, with agents that otherwise they wouldn't have access to, or have their work be known in a specific way, in a significant way. That is so exciting to me. And also the buy-in, like you said, Daniel, of $5,000 is not unattainable. It is at such a level that most venues, if they're really truly committed to this, can find that somewhere. They can get it underwritten. They can use sponsorship dollars. It is such an accessible price point to be part of something larger. and help make the case of, hey, we can do this at $5,000. We can start something small and see where it goes from there. I think it's such a great way to open the door to venues that maybe have never considered a path towards commissioning before because they simply don't have the staff or the budget or the resources to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I learned to the second part of your question was that this community that is formed now of presenters and folks, and Katie, you're just brilliant administration of this. There's no way this would have got off the ground without you. I have to say that. There's absolutely no way, because we were sort of like, we need help administratively to this. We just can't take this on, and without your work it wouldn't happen. But one of the other things that I learned was that just because an artist didn't get funded didn't mean it was a lost opportunity, because I saw a number of projects that were called to my attention I otherwise wouldn't have seen. And even if I didn't fund a certain artist, I'm certainly going to book them when that tour comes on the road. So I think it was a win-win in every possible regard.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And we heard that time and time again, kind of in our closed door conversations as people were making those decisions of, they're on my radar and I'm going to be following this project. And it was really interesting watching venue members, like they really wanted to work together. So I think every single project that made it to the pitch stage had interested partners for commissioning dollars, but there was a lot of jockeying of like, well, I'm equally interested in this and this. I hear that you also have an interest in this. Let's work together so our dollars can go farther. But that doesn't mean I'm letting that other artist or that project off my radar. I'm going to be following it and following it deeply for when the time comes for if I can bring it to my venue.
Building on that, there's new relationships between different venues from across the country. Folks that had never met before or worked together before now are in this together, and they're having deep philosophical conversations about what it means. Like the pieces we were seeing, what is the meaning behind them? How is this going to play in my market? How is this going to enhance, my educational programming at my venue, but also looking at the broader marketplace as well. And what do we need as an industry? What don't we have anymore that maybe fell away that we need more of? It was such a beautiful process to see everyone come together and have those conversations in good faith with each other, and really just want to support the creation of new, amazing art. It's so exciting.
Yeah, hats off to y'all. That is so exciting. I mean, that means everything that you were able to kind of be innovative in this moment. I mean, I think the other gift that we've gotten from the past 5 years is how do we be innovative, and where's the ingenuity in how we continue to support each other in this very cyclical kind of relationship that artists and presenters and agents have. That's tremendous. It's so cool. That's really great. And, I'll also speak to visibility. Like you said, those who weren't awarded, but then having that visibility, what it means. Some of my greatest projects and gifts were from things that I was denied 10 and 15 years ago that just find their way back to a Daniel or a Caroline being like, hey, remember that thing? We can do that now. It's 10 years later and they applied for this thing and da-da-da-da-da. So it all is a part of that kind of circle of what we do, which is really great. So hats off. That's so great.
Thank you, Paige. Well, and artist friends and venue friends, if you're interested in learning more about the 2A Tour Development Collective, want more information or have a chat, you can reach out to me via my website, michiganmaven.art. Send me an email and I'm happy to pass along more information to you about our timeline and the next steps of the project. So before we leave, friends, I'm going to ask each of you the same question as our closing. So we're talking about commissioning. We're talking about the importance of new work, particularly in the theater for young audience spaces, because the kids and the families we're serving now through this work are the future of our audiences, of our artists, of our patron base, all of that. So if you were in a position that you're going to your executive director or you're looking for a commissioning partner page, what is the argument you would make to somebody you're trying to convince that this work is important and necessary now in 2025?
Nobody is going to deny that the challenges are higher than they've ever been. And we have a responsibility, if we want to ensure that there is great work on our stages to meet our community, we have a responsibility to be feeding into that ecosystem. And we have models now, whether you can be out front or you can join something like this collective that we've started, that you can get your foot in the door. And you're going to find that you reap that both with the art on your stages, the relationship with artists, and your community is going to see you as a leader in this field in a whole new way. And that's just going to generate additional respect and support for what you're doing. And it's a win-win. it's a small price tag on the front end, but the payoff is going to be big.
I would add to that, we have great facilities and we have great venues and we have beautiful buildings, but we're going to be measured by what we put in them and the communities that we bring into them. And so if we want to have a longer view than, how am I going to get through this season? How am I going to get through next season? Everything's so tight. If we want to have somewhat of a longer view, you want to think about what happens if we don't take these steps, if we just stagnate. We're going to see more artists leave the field. We're going to see more agents leave the field. And, we're going to be in a place where we're all booking the same 3 commercial shows throughout the country, and it's going to be a very stagnant, disenriched future of these children. And we can't, I would say, we're blessed with being in a position that we're able to make choices that have an impact beyond the scope of our own uniqueness, I would say. So with that responsibility, I feel we've got to have an eye on the future. And to Caroline's point, it's not a huge investment we're asking everyone to make. And the outcomes and the things that you get out of this are so much more richer than you put into them. So join the collective, my friend. We're here for you.
Yeah, I'll echo more of that. I mean, I think it's very important now that we don't fall into a lull, that the variety still exists, that the relatability, the freshness of what it is to be a new work in a time like this when we can speak directly to, again, any need of any given community is so important because we don't want to fall behind. And just like Daniel said, the exodus of artists, feeling like we still have homes, artistic homes, but also just the belief that what our work, means, that it matters, that it is impactful, all the things we've already gotten, all the metrics and receipts around, we want to be able to continue that. And in a moment of adversity, in a moment of hardship, so that it feels like, we can come out even stronger. But I think this is the time to really buckle down in a way that you haven't, just because of that. And again, making sure that we have not just 3 shows to pick from, but a whole spectrum of experiences and interactions and empathy and eye-opening. It's so important to keep pouring into work like this.
Excellent. Paige, Daniel, Caroline, thank you so much for joining me today here on There's No Business Like. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I'm grateful for your time. I'm grateful for all the energy and hard work you are putting into our field. The 3 of you are at the top of my list in terms of those that are making this better and keeping the good work moving forward. So thank you, my friends, for your time today.
Thank you, Katie.
Yes, thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Katie.
Business like.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to There's No Business Like. Our producers and hosts are Brian Zelmer, Josh Benson, Kevin Maynard, Katie Miller, and me, Danielle Van Hook. Views expressed in this podcast are ours alone and are not reflective of the organizations we are a part of. Keep up with us at nobusinesslike.com. There you'll find links to all of our episodes and socials. If you like this podcast, give us a like, a follow, a review, or our favorite, a 5-star rating. Oh wait, what was that site? I got it, don't worry. It is nobusinesslike.com. Do I sound out bus-I-ness every time I type it? Yep, sure do. Stay in touch, my friends.